Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Today's community session is going to be describing the project work that Content and Code have done with TESCO. So, my name is Wes Hackett. I'm a solutions architect at Content and Code, an MS Gold partner based here in London. My blog is weshackett.com, so I've currently got some interesting slides around my site customization, which is one of the topics that we covered today. You can follow me on Twitter at Wes Hackett. In my spare time, I'm also one of the founding members of the Community Kit for SharePoint Development Tools Edition, which is the community kit around Visual Studio extensions and basically development tools. So, as I said, I'm a solutions architect at Content and Code, and I've been working for the last 18 months at TESCO as the solutions architect on the TESCO project. So, what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk a bit about TESCO, what the people ask for at the organisation, and how we use SharePoint 2010 to put each individual member of TESCO's organisation at the centre of their universe. And then last couple of slides on what we're going to be doing in the future. Okay, so who are TESCO? TESCO primarily are a UK-based retailer. They're head officed in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire and with large offices in Welwyn Garden City. They are primarily focused on retailing. They also have bank, mobile phone, gold exchange, wine clubs, online shopping and many more. They've just launched a second-hand car sales enterprise. So they're in a lot of markets just in the UK. They are the second largest retailer across the globe by profit, only bested by Walmart. They are the largest private employer in the UK, employing just under 500,000 people in the UK. And they're based here, but they operate in 14 countries, including Central Europe, East Asia, America, and India, which gives us a total headcount of around 50,000 office-based staff for TESCO globally. So TESCO had a vision back in 2009. They wanted to improve the way they work together. They wanted to share information in a more intelligent fashion. They wanted to change the way they work. They wanted to go through step change across the organisation to bring those 50,000 people together as one community. They want to collaborate. They want to share that experience. So, for example, Fish Buyer in Hong Kong shares experience with a Fish Buyer in Cheshunt. They talk about the ways they work, improving that engagement. It all relates back to TESCO's Every Little Helps strategy. That's their corporate strategy. Everything we do on this project has to be related back to making elements of that strategy work. So this is all focused on working smarter together and making their working day more enjoyable, thus feeling connected to the wider TESCO community. Okay, so right at the beginning of the project, back in 2009, we looked at what TESCO were using already across the estate. And we found that a lot of their design teams were using Facebook or Flickr, very visual focus in the work they were doing. We found people were connecting via LinkedIn, so there was TESCO alumni communities out on LinkedIn that people were connecting via. Twitter, a lot of the director levels, they all have mobile devices with Twitter enablement, so they were using Twitter to keep in touch with each other. Believe it or not, there was also some MySpace stuff going on around some sort of social activities within the organisation. Quite a lot of the .com, so that's the online presence for TESCO, we're working on WordPress blogs, so there's some interesting articles. There's one recently about tracking vans, and a couple of vans turning up in Poland, and it was because they'd been sold, so there was some interesting public blogs coming out of TESCO. And they also had SharePoint already, so they've got two big SharePoint installations. They've got a document share, which is just under 3 terabytes of data at this point. Microsoft tell us it's the world's largest single content database as well, so they've got quite a lot of documentation held. And they had a small pilot in both MOS and the CTP of SharePoint 2010 when we started the project. So as you can see, a wide range of probably what we'd accept today as social sites, publicly available social sites, as well as some internal provisioning. So the project's called Hub, and it's based on SharePoint 2010. So we started on the CTP, we moved through public beta and then on to RTM, so we've gone through that cycle. So we're very much an early adopter of the technology. When we talked to people in the organisation, we asked them what they wanted from the platform, and primarily most people wanted something, well, to use the phrase, like Facebook. Yeah, everyone wanted a space they felt they owned, they could collaborate, they got the information they wanted fed onto it. They wanted information across the organisation that was relevant to them, so they're not really interested, as a fish bar, you're not really interested in the clothing designs, unless you want to just out of curiosity, but it was all about bringing the relevant information from across the TESCO group into each individual's homepage. They also wanted team sites and community sites, so they allowed them to work together and basically build up that community. So we looked at the solution, and we had three sort of traditional ways of thinking about it. Replicating a hierarchy, being geolocated across 14 countries, multi-language, all of those things. Traditional company hierarchy soon became quite complex to think about. Corporate news focused homepage, so something that we got through feedback was they didn't feel that corporate news was very fresh, didn't update very often, therefore it wasn't very valuable to each individual user. And a lockdown homepage, so people wanted the ability to customise the homepage. They didn't want something that somebody else decided was the most beneficial for them. So we decided all of those were out. We didn't want to do that. And we had to think, well, OK, we've got SharePoint, we've got experience. We need to just start using those building blocks in a different way. And the way we came up with it is we thought, OK, we need to put the My Site centrally. So technically, the My Site central, you get a homepage for you. It is yours. You do with as you please. It's completely your space within TESCO. It's putting you at the centre of that organisation. So it's quite radically different thinking towards traditional intranet design. If you consider yourself in the top left-hand corner, the wide organisation to the top right, closest distance to you is your My Site. You come into your My Site, it's your home page. Every time you type the URL, it's your page. Layered on top of that, bringing in the profile capability. We're using the SharePoint profile system to give people the ability to connect, look at views, share interests. Think sort of Facebook, LinkedIn profiles, kind of giving them that capability. Next up's team sites. So this is very rarely do TESCO work in an organisational unit as a team. They are very much a natural work team-based organisation. They have multidisciplines. So our project team, for example, has 5 members from content and code. It has some developers from their Indian office, and it has some group technology and architecture architects representing the business. Below that is community sites. So there's also a trend in TESCO for sharing as a community, so more discipline-based. So something like a business systems analysis. There's a community site for BSAs. And then furthest away from you, so stuff you interact with less frequently and have less control over, is things like TESCO Academy, which is the online training mechanism for TESCO, pay and benefits, and various other sites around your employment. And then the corporate site, which is the corporate communications site, so the news, the community sort of events, stuff that you'd find being more broadcast out as TESCO are doing this. And then sort of wrapping that together is the ability to connect wherever you are on the planet. So extranet and internet access, and also device agnostic, so you can be on your laptop as well as something like an iPad. Underpinning the whole thing was the ability to unify search. So TESCO, when we started the project, didn't have the ability to search their organisation internally. Every system had its own search. They weren't rolled into one. So we brought enterprise search in. We've got instant messaging, so the Microsoft Communications Server, desktop sharing, video web conferencing provided by Cisco, and that's a capability across the platform. Okay, so we talked about putting the My Site centrally. This would be your homepage out of the box. And we looked at this and we thought, OK, so you've got your own space. You can customise it as you want. But as you can see, it's focused primarily on stuff that you've created. It's your documents, your blog posts. It's not very engaging. When we did a survey of some pilot users, they sort of said, I don't really want to go back here. There's no value in coming here every day. So we started to think about, OK, the exposure of Facebook and LinkedIn and the activities, and the reason people go and look at Facebook is they want to see what's going on. And SharePoint 2010 brings us new capability. It brings us the activity feed. So we decided that the default state of a My Site provisioned at TESCO was going to be centrally focused around activity, in the same way that the concept of Facebook and LinkedIn do. So what does that bring us? Well, it brings us birthdays. You get notifications of your colleagues' birthdays, job title, new colleagues, so when you add a new colleague, status message, so you've got on your profile page, you can update the status and tell people what you're thinking. Interests, skills, and ask me about updates. So these are profile things, so interests and skills. Then it comes on to the social events, so you've got tagging when you tag content, ratings when you rate it, and noteboard posts when you want to share either on someone's profile or on a piece of content. That noteboard post comes through on your activity. We looked at that, again, passed it through our pilot users. Again, the feedback was, yeah, brilliant. Gives me more than I got before, but actually it's still not meeting what we envisaged to have. So we looked at adding enterprise content. So out of the box, SharePoint is all about content. Wikis, documents, blogs, discussions. None of that by default appears in the activity feed. So we had to look at how to do this. So we've extended the activity feed system in a supported API way with all standard out-of-the-box enterprise content. So things we bring in. We bring in announcements, discussions, discussion replies, wikis and enterprise wikis. So obviously there's the team site wiki homepage and the enterprise wiki. There are two different types of wiki within SharePoint 2010. Blog posts, again, very important from a requirements perspective. People wanted to be able to blog, share their experience in the same way they did on the internet. They wanted to do that internally, so they could talk about much more sensitive topics. And blog comments to be able to get feedback from other people reading their blogs. Next up, media. So some of the more rich media items. So here we've got 5 giraffe pictures uploaded to an images library. Audio, so somebody uploading an MP3. And video, so somebody uploading another digital asset. So the full range of enterprise content there. And it's not limited by, these are based off the content type hierarchy. Therefore, if you go and create a custom video content type, this stuff all gets picked up. So we're not limiting the information architecture in this way. So we put that again back through the pilot users group. And we said, OK, you've got social, profile, ECM. Is your feed more engaging? Do you want to come back to this page? Again, feedback, not really. Still not quite what we're expecting. So we went back to the drawing board and we thought, OK, what is it that makes people like Facebook? Well, it's a clean but engaging interface because it actually sort of brings the images, the videos, and brings them to life, if you like. So we introduced a thing called the Super User Interface, just another acronym to go along with all the others. And we took each type and we spoke to users and we said, OK, what would make this more engaging? So if we looked at new colleague, we swap that out for the profile picture. If we take discussion, we put the discussion with iconography to denote it, and we put a synopsis of the first 150 characters of that discussion. Replies, same deal, iconography, the synopsis of the reply. Wiki and enterprise, again, so there's a trend here where we're using icons to denote the type. We're giving the title and all the same information plus the synopsis, bringing down. And then finally, the announcement. So visually, you can see that's much more engaging, but more importantly, it's bringing you reasons to go and read further. You're looking at that, you can see the synopsis, you can go, actually, I want to see that, I want to go and read that full article because the first couple of lines has enticed me. Next up, blogs and blog comments. Now, the interesting one with blog comments is that we also publish those blog comments back to you as the blog owner. So it's the only time that just being colleagues is sort of extended at this point. So normally you wouldn't see the comments on your blog because you're not necessarily the colleague of the person making the comments. So we had to think about that scenario. So blog comments are handled slightly differently in that they always appear for you as well as the blog owner. And then pictures. So you can see there currently we've got a link to 5 of the pictures. And then with the new user interface, we're bringing the thumbnails. So it's bringing that content directly into your feed, making you get more information, very Facebook-esque. Then the final one are the audio and video. So we bring in the Silverlight Media Player, which is all out-of-the-box capability for both audio and video. So all of those extensions are supported out the box. That's an API that we've used, and all of those items still appear in the out-of-the-box web parts and the out-of-the-box RSS feed and are not broken. They still work in the same way they did. So that brought us the homepage content, and this is now the default state of a homepage when it's provisioned to a TESCO user. As you can see, we've got the Facebook activities type feed down the center. Hub tips. So part of the adoption and evangelism across TESCO is the fact that you can't assume that everybody's familiar with social media. You can't assume that everybody's familiar with SharePoint or even uses a computer frequently in their job. Not everybody does. Distribution centers, for example, don't spend a lot of time in front of a computer. So Hub Tips was about a quick 10 lines to say, OK, there's a new capability. Go and have a look at it. Read more in the Help Center. So up top right, we've got a Help Center link, which is an enterprise wiki full of content in very layman's language about how to go ahead and why you should use things, and more importantly, the why you should use bits of the feature set. So center's about what's going on and what's new. Left-hand side is about finding information. So we've got TESCO share price, very important to employees of TESCO. A lot of their rewards are share-based. Colleagues, so about connecting people. Find people, you can quickly search for people across this component. And also, when you add people in colleagues, you can set them up as teams, and it gives you the ability to select through those teams and linked with your OCS presence to bring in quick, I want to find that person, click, send an email. In very much the same way we saw in Chris's video, seeing that presence very quickly gets you connected. Colleague suggestions, there's a better view on the next slide, but I'll talk about it then. And the right-hand concept was news. So it's about things that are more broadcast consumption rather than interaction. So we've got the corporate comms block. So the only two elements that somebody can't move is the hub tips and the corporate comms. So they have defined space. And then we've got a whole bunch of RSS readers provisioned by default and sort of TESCO news, what's going on in the wider world for them. So this is below the fold. So let's jump back to colleague suggestion. So one of the things that your users wanted to know was, across the organisation, if somebody shares skills with me, interests, I might never meet them. So what we do is we get people to fill out their profile, and we encourage them to fill out their profile. And one of the key drivers to this is that the more intelligent you fill out your profile, the more intelligent the colleague suggester becomes, because it will look at your skills, your interests, and it will try and find people that you aren't already colleague with, and it will say, hey, this guy shares SharePoint as an interest. This guy shares Formula One. This guy cycles on a weekend. You know, do you want to go and get in touch with him? So it's about building those networks, building those relationships across the organisation. Below that, we've got I Need To, which actually is a web part that was deprecated in 2010. So we've put in an implementation of that. It's a centralised list of quick jump tos, like I want to book a holiday, I want to book travel, I want to submit a sickness form, just those quick jumps. Below that, quick launch, and then even further down is yet another area that you can put web parts, so you can completely customise that page. And you can see, still continuing through, we've got the activity, so that's the full height of the page. I think it by default pulls back 25 items, but you can increase that to 40. On the right-hand side, we've got blog roll. So this is the latest 5 blogs from across the entire TESCO hub. And you can see, actually, in the screenshot, there's a guy there saying, hey, it'd be great to use social media with our supply chain. Yeah, so we're already starting to see great uptake from the blogs. We had several of the directors are now blogging, which people in the grad scheme, right down at that level in the organisation, asking directors questions, getting feedback. It's really starting to break down the barriers of the hierarchy within TESCO. And then right at the bottom corner, you've got weather, and there's a whole bunch of other weather-esque kind of just like pools, components that you can add to this page. So we don't necessarily provision all the components by default. And that's the homepage for everybody. So you can fully customise that. If you don't want the activity feed there, you can throw it in the right, you can move it around, you can get rid of it. It gives that TESCO employee ownership of their intranet. Every time they type in that one URL, they go there, their homepage looks different to mine, to their bosses, everybody else's, in very much the same way that Facebook does. Okay, so as I said, TESCO have got 50,000 people. We had to think about performance, and especially considering my site's now the default landing page, you don't have quite the same challenges with a brochureware site that you would do with a fully customised, person-centric intranet. So the first one we look at is gathering with scale. So this is about how do I gather activity at that scale point. First iteration we released shortly after May, so we RTM'd, and we released the first iteration, which was with the enterprise content. It was querying by site collection, so it was going through each team site individually on a schedule and querying for that data and pushing it into the activity feed. In about 2 months, we found that was far too slow. It was taking up to an hour to go through that platform and scrape the data, just because people were really starting to use it quite heavily. So we're on to our second iteration, and this time it's changelog based. So this is using the changelog capability, technicals, to basically query that by content database, which has improved our performance by about 100 times quicker, I think, was the performance thing. So it's really quick now. You can do that in about 3 minutes. It was taking about an hour. So, second thing to consider, security trimming. So Microsoft, as I say, don't bring enterprise content into the activity feed out of the box. So some of the things we had to think about was security trimming, the complexities of, okay, I've uploaded a document into my personal space on my site, only I have access to it. I don't want to see that published on my profile page as activity I've made. It could be that your team site is a sensitive team site, and that all the documentation in there shouldn't be published to anyone unless they've got access to it. So we had to think about all the scenarios about security trimming, making sure that people didn't see stuff they were not supposed to in terms of the synopsis, etc. And we had to think about the performance of that. So obviously, coming back to the gathering, it's done at gathering time. In the same way the out-of-the-box social stuff is done at gathering time. It's not done on the fly. So we have to think about how we can make that query performant. And the final one was configuration. So we had to think about at which points in the system do we want to configure this? Do we want to say, OK, it crawls everything regardless? Or do we want to say, OK, it'll crawl this site, and it'll crawl this site, and it'll crawl this site, and it'll ignore this one? For various configurations. So we went through those iterations. And we got to sort of phase 3, and we said, well, actually, colleagues isn't enough. Okay? SharePoint by default is showing you activity of your colleagues. You have to have that connection to be able to see that information. So you have to think about scenarios like, I want to follow what this team's doing. But out of the box, you'd have to follow everybody in that team to see the activity coming out of that team. But then the scenario of, well, if somebody new joins that team and you don't know about it, you miss their content. Somebody new joins the team, somebody leaves the team. You've got to maintain your connections to see the appropriate data. Also, as we say, natural work teams, you are in several teams. I mean, I'm in 3 teams at TESCO. I'm not actually a TESCO employee. I work for Content and Code. So you can see how you can quickly see too much. So you might say, OK, actually, the hub projects, I'm really interested in that stuff. But Wesley's creating stuff here and here as well, and it's clouding my information, effectively. So we took that to the next level, and we implemented subscriptions. So you can subscribe in 2 locations. You can subscribe at a site level and see everything under that site from that point down in the hierarchy. Or you can go to an individual list, and you can use the ribbon context in the list to subscribe or unsubscribe from that location. So this is now not only have you got the ability to do it by person, you've got the ability to see activity by location. And we underpin that with a custom service application. So we've built an infrastructure around that to provide the subscription mechanism based on location. So once we had subscriptions in place, it became imperative to actually tell a user why they were seeing stuff in their activity feed. So obviously, originally, you knew because it was you or a colleague. You have to be a colleague of that person. Once you subscribed, we introduced a small cog onto each individual line item of your activity feed, and we give the user the ability to be told why they're seeing this. So currently, this item, for example, is because I'm a colleague of Darren Gibson, I see that item. Should I have got that because of a subscription, it would have said you're subscribed and tell you the site, and the unsubscribe is enabled to allow you to unsubscribe to that location from within your activity feed. So you don't even need to browse to that site. Okay, so that was your home page. In the next sort of distance out from you was your profile. And we found that actually the out-of-the-box profile system, the page, didn't really need any customization. It gives us everything that TESCO needed. The organisation chart, that's a big deal to TESCO. Until this point, there was no way to browse around the organisation. You couldn't go up your hierarchy, across your hierarchy, any way like that. You've got the About Me standard profile properties. So this is nothing that you wouldn't see if you just install a profile. And sort of next up was we removed the hierarchy. Okay, so we, as we said, it's my site centric. There's no longer a hierarchy representing site. We're not talking about finance then has a sub-team, then has a sub-team. This is like one long, wide bunch of teams. So we had to meet the challenge of how do you get to places you need to work within. And we implemented My Teams. So it's a permission-based mechanism, and it says if you've got contribute rights to a site, it will appear in your My Teams. It thinks you are part of that team. So if you're granted contribute rights, you can see I've got 3 teams there. Hub Rangers being the team responsible for this project. And it will show the first level subsites that I've got access to in My Teams. And again, this is a page that is completely bespoke per user. So they see only their contribute teams effectively. So we had the scale considerations. We had to think about how we were going to persist that data. And again, it's underpinned by a custom service application because it spans so many site collections. Okay, so the other side of that is how do I know about stuff that I don't have contribute rights at the moment, and where can I find out extra bits of information? Well, search is an obvious one. But other than that, site directories. So with MOS, you may be aware that there was a site directory template. You could pump out a site directory, and every time you create a site, you could put a row in that list, and it would display. Unfortunately, with 2010, that's deprecated. It's there for backward compatibility, but you can't use it out the box. So we looked at the various community available stuff. So the Microsoft Consulting Services Site Directory 2010, we had a look at that. We found that at the scale point where we're talking, the gathering of that information was too slow. It was taking 5 or 6 hours to get across our platform to update that information, which obviously if you consider a request can come in, new team sites can be created, you want to see that both in your site directory and your My Teams. It was just too slow. So again, site directory is driven out of that My Teams infrastructure, so it's back into that service application. And that provides you with the site name, the site listing, and you can do various sorting on this page. So this is available as a site directory. Again, it's security trimmed, so if there's a site on there you don't have access to completely, it will trim that out. And we thought, okay, that's great, that's a site directory. But when I go to the site, how do I know, we've only got 1 line of text effectively, or 2 in some cases, of what that team's about. So coupled with this, every team site that's provisioned, every community site that's provisioned gets an About Us page. And site owners, anyone that's in the site owners group, until that About Us page is complete, they literally can't browse anywhere else on the site. So you get a site created, you have to fill that out, and that's how we enforce that the site directory gets populated. And then we have a schedule mechanism that goes back through that and checks for its completeness and whether it's been removed and whether the site itself's been removed. So we do the tidying up mechanism as well. And that gives us the whole kind of, these are my teams that I'm dealing with. This is everything in the estate that we can browse through. And currently we're running at about 270 team and community sites and around 40,000 individual home pages. So we're quite large in that scale. So I mentioned that we moved away from the traditional corporate intranet of this is news, this is coming out of internal comms, this is coming out of the marketing team, this is coming out of any other news channel the organisation has. So we had to come up with a way of actually providing that capability, and what we did was we just treat those types of sites as publishing sites as content sections. So they sit within the site. It's a publishing-based site, and it's quite, this one's quite deep. There's quite a lot of stuff in their global sort of intranet publishing comms sort of site. And then we agreed that actually you should be able to get at it from the global header. So as you've seen on the slides, that dark coloured header is consistent across the entire platform. It's the only thing that is consistent across the platform visually. The team sites can be structured however they want. They can have whatever theme applied to them they like. But that global header ties the entire platform together. So this one's really well consumed because it is the corporate one, the group-wide comms. So we've got Philip Clark, who's taken over leading TESCO as the new CEO. His blog is within checkout, so that's driving footfall into that site. And as you notice on the right-hand side, you've got the ability to subscribe. So in conversation with corporate comms, one of the challenges was they said, well, what if nobody ever comes to our site? And we said, if you don't write engaging content, nobody will want to come to your site. And they said, OK, well, we want to reduce the number of emails. And I said, that's good, because everybody just deletes them. That came as a bit of a surprise, because they were expecting everybody to read every line of every email that the comms team sent out. And actually, very few people did, because they have a restricted mailbox size, they have a lot of email coming in, their traffic is heavy, and actually that, in terms of value to doing their day job, is not as high. So by having the subscription mechanism, it now means that people can subscribe to certain parts of this site that interest them, or the entire site. So they get to choose what they consume. So we've seen a lot of subscriptions going into Philip's Place, which is Philip Clark's blog. Many people are subscribing to his blog, and not necessarily the rest of checkout. But it still drives footfall into checkout, and they're starting to understand how they can leverage that in much more of a sort of public, the same sort of thing you do with a public-facing website. If you're getting a lot of people hitting one page, you can actually start putting things in that drive footfall to other parts of that site. So, really a new learning curve for the comms team. One, they've been well up for the challenge, and they're really starting to bring in those social aspects to it. So, on to the challenges. Well, there's a lot of cultural change required in this. So, a biggie was open readership. So when we arrived at TESCO, every team has almost had a system to themselves. They're very silos of information, and not really looking to share that information with the wider organisation. Almost the kind of knowledge is power, and we've got it, you haven't, we're more powerful kind of concept. So we had to look at how we could break down those barriers, open up the readership. So the entire hub platform is open as a reader. Every authenticated TESCO employee can look at, I think there's only 2 director level team sites where it's locked down. Every other site and team you can read everything. And we enforce that. We have a scheduled mechanism that goes through the site, and if somebody makes changes to permissions, we put them back. We basically tell them, I mean, they get notification, but we say, no, this is open readership. Yeah, you can secure this little section or this little section to your permissions, but your main site needs to be open. You work for TESCO, these people work for TESCO, there should be no reason to not share that information. So they have to put a full business case forward for having a site lockdown. So there are some areas of TESCO that are very sensitive, and they have a full lockdown in place, and the mechanism honours that lockdown. Non-document centric. So as I mentioned, the previous 2003 doc share, 2.7 terabytes of documentation. We didn't want people to just uplift that, drop it in SharePoint 2010 and go, OK, we don't need DocShare anymore, and we're just going to use Hub. It wasn't the right way of working. So we had to show people, actually, your content's now going into blogs. It's now going into comments, tags, more the social aspects of the platform, rather than just in Word, just in PowerPoint. Not a file share. So again, kind of hand in hand with the too much documentation. It was, well, it's not there for you to use as your home drive in that respect. You've got other parts of the infrastructure in TESCO to provide that. We had to evangelise the open yet secure. So obviously breaking down those barriers of open readership, very challenging because people said, okay, well, now everyone's got access to it, how do I control it? We had to sort of reassure the user base that, well, everyone can read it, everyone can look at it, it's open, but only you can contribute. It's your team, only you have those rights to contribute. And we had very interesting conversations with several teams around that, saying, okay, well, you know, you'll get people reading it that you wouldn't expect to read it and making comment. And they found a couple of weeks after their team sites got up, they got some blogs on their team site, they got some really good feedback. There was a brilliant example where a guy in his spare time had been doing some 3D modelling of store layout. On his blog, he throws in the little WPF application, people download it, they played around with it, they went, this is brilliant, it could be used in this, and this way. Have you thought about it? And the guy went, oh no, I'd never thought about doing that. You know, so it was immediately showing the value of connecting two disparate parts of the organisation through the social mechanism, the team site, that they wouldn't probably have ever heard of. It's that whole kind of having a cigarette outside, having that conversation, what are you working on? Oh, I'm working on this. Oh, you should talk to Bob, he's working on that as well. You know, it's kind of, the platform's all about bringing those two people together. Adoption for those not using social sites. So, you know, take, for example, the graduate program, 95% of those people already had Facebook presence, already had Twitter presence, and they were just like, oh, this is brilliant, this is just Facebook inside the firewall. Fantastic. A lot of the other areas of the business didn't necessarily have that uptake of the social enterprise, so we had to work on small chunks. Now, we took the approach that blogging was a really easy way for people to engage with other members of staff in a relatively non-confrontational way. It's a very easy way to get into sharing information. It's not very formal, so there's no kind of, oh, you said that, you know, and that's wrong, I don't think that's right, sort of thing. And we saw a great uptake from that. So across bank, across .com, across the wider PLC, across these countries, we've seen people connecting through blogs and talking and building up relationships through the blogging infrastructure. So those were the kind of nothing to do with SharePoint, effectively, really, those challenges. They were just, how do I make, you know, collaboration take off in TESCO? How do I make hubs successful? But on the other side of that was technical at scale. So out-of-the-box SharePoint. It's a centrally located platform. It's not geolocated. And, of course, you've got the speed of light between its data center and people out in Asia Pac and you know, those sort of considerations. We've got my site-centric intranet. So the hit on the profile system, you know, we had to look at Microsoft's figures and we had to look at how it scales. We had to look at the resources required for those parts of the infrastructure. That's very challenging because although out of the box they quote all the performance figures, you know, you have to say, okay, well that's on 32 servers and we've got this many servers. You know, where do we need to find the common ground? Where do we need to put our stake in the sand? And the organisation operate a very challenging but actually very efficient model of overselling infrastructure. So in the same way that an airline sells more seats than it has on the plane, our platform, we have a certain amount of quotas given out to teams. We don't provision all the way up to that quota because we'd have a huge data center requirement for that. So we have an ongoing maintenance mechanism and a very on-the-ball admin team who make sure that that sort of moving goalpost is just in time, you know, keeping the cost to the minimum. Obviously, with the current economic climate, cost saving is very important to both that business and businesses in the wider sense. And that's one way to achieve it with SharePoint 2010 is not necessarily to look at your capacity plan and go, okay, I need 40 gigabytes of the disk, I'll put 40 gigabytes of disk in. You know, it's to think, well, okay, well, actually, I only need 10 gigabytes for now, and 10 and 10 and 10, and grow it, and think about how you can save costs in that respect. Custom development. So obviously, there's a lot of customization there. So in 2007, there were some very interesting ways to customize the My Site, and it kind of was like a check on the load of the page, and it would do the customization. Actually, you know, we sort of looked at that challenge, and we came at it at a different angle, which was, well, leave the out-of-the-box My Site alone, and we'll just put our stuff alongside it and change point to it. So the way that we've customised my site is slightly different to some of the other articles on the internet. Custom components, again, at scale. So things like the activity feed, we had to look at performance of the activity feed in its gathering, but also in the rendering. If you're rendering 25 highly complex items, so you've got a lot of images or videos and stuff, you need to work out the most efficient way to render that and plug in the extra functionality over the top. So we've made heavy use of jQuery, Ajax-style techniques of lazy loading, and the same way Facebook does, where it clicks down and it will just bring some more information in. And all of the web parts that go off to disparate things like RSS reads, they need to do that and not pull the page down if that's offline or it can't be gathered in time. The social features in ECM. So the social feature scale, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head what Microsoft quote it can support, but we had to make sure we knew and understood that by putting ECM into that system, that we weren't going to exceed the boundaries of what they say is supported in the social database. I think it's something like 6 million rows, individual rows. So we need to make sure in our 14-day rolling window, we were clever enough not to overrun that 6 million row. And then the final part of the scale is all the infrastructure stuff, which I might add I'm not a specialist in, but it's things like database LUNs and all the kind of deep, dark, techie things that I just rely on some more intelligent person to do. And that stuff is kind of there in place, and it's done by the sort of several teams at TESCO. So those were our challenges. Future plans. So as I said, a lot of the directors level are already using Twitter. A lot of the grads are using Twitter. So we're going to bring Twitter integration in, so you can see people's feeds. It will come through. There's already some examples on the community sites like Codeplex of Twitter integration to the activity feed, but we're talking about proper, don't need to log into TweetDeck to use Twitter. We can do it straight through Hub. It's like an on-place application. TESCO use a lot of Cisco kit, as I mentioned. They're using web conferencing, telepresence, so they have these big half sort of conference screens. They use that very heavily, so we're looking at having that brought into Hub as the part of the collaboration, alongside Link server, so bringing the update to the OCS platform there. The big one and the real sort of thing we're just kicking off now is business portals, surfacing various line of business applications. So taking the enterprise, what you do as a day job, and actually bringing in those systems so that you go to one portal to see a whole group of different line of business systems like the supply chain management, that sort of thing, all through Hub. Sort of MIS data as well, all bringing that in. Again, TESCO are very keen that we improve the external supplier connectivity. And that's not just about can they connect to Hub, that's about how do they use Hub to give us value. So if you took the example of developing a product, there's a life cycle that product development goes through. And we have to think about how we're going to help supplier, TESCO, work together to improve that product through one system, allowing them to share that data. And then the evergreen sort of thing on the activity feed. Very familiar if you use Facebook, but out of the box it doesn't support likes, comments, inline. So we're embellishing that user interface again through this custom service app. We've got two very talented guys building that. It's coming very shortly, probably 2 or 3 weeks away before we launch that to the users. So that's bringing even more stuff into their homepage, really making people want to go there. So in summary, it's a person-centric solution. It's very socially focused, bringing TESCO together, making them work as one organisation. It brings them relevant information. It connects people. So these fish buyers, they talk to each other. The supply chain now talk to each other around things, share best practices. We've seen videos getting uploaded. Oh, we do this in this distribution centre. Oh, we do this in this distribution centre. Meeting up, talking to people. Opened up. So the open readership, very important, I think, to helping TESCO move forward. And each person owns Hub. They have their own ownership of their My Site. They do what they want, brings the real, oh, I can do that. I can just have one thing on my page, and you can have 50. I don't mind. It's giving each user the sort of ownership and engagement with the platform. Okay. Well, thanks for attending. Anyone got any questions?